Good morning. Good morning to all of our students, faculty, and staff who are joining us today. Welcome to a UTSA Women's History event, Empowering Women Leaders to Rise, a women's leadership panel. I'm Melissa Hernandez, and I'm the Director of Counseling and Mental Health Services, and I'm one of your moderators today.
I am Victoria Lopez Herrera, the Senior Associate Director for Campus Recreation and your co-moderator. Thank you to our live audience for joining us this morning, and thank you to the group watching on demand. Our sponsors for today's events are the UTSA Peace Center, the Multicultural Student Center for Equity and Justice, Counseling and Mental Health Services, Student Health Services, Campus Recreation, and the Department of Race, Ethnicity, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. As a member of the UTSA community, we acknowledge that we are visitors to Indigenous territories called Yanawana. The name refers to the San Antonio River as a source of life for this city. The original caretakers of this land include the Carrizo Come Crudo, as well as many Calhuiteca speaking bands. Without them, we would not have access to this land, to this gathering, and to this dialogue. We thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here, and we honor First Peoples, past and present, and seek to work in collaboration with all nations with whom we share Yanawana.
Thank you, Victoria. We have an extremely talented and accomplished and diverse group of women ready to lead us in an exciting conversation this morning. Our panelists will respond to student questions about their experience, insights, and research on today's topic areas.
Today, we also have students with us representing student government, athletics, and student organizations who are leaders in their own right. They will be presenting our panelists with the questions and will introduce themselves at that time. We also welcome participants to post questions in the chat box.
If time allows, our line of questioning will take place in 4 rounds covering topics suggested by our students, and they include discrimination in the workplace, the gender pay gap and salary negotiation, work-life balance, and advancing in your profession.
So let's have our panelists go ahead and introduce themselves. Dr. Carrie Sinon, I'm sorry.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kerry Sinanan. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of English. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I acknowledge that I'm not a visitor, but I am sitting on the stolen land that rightfully belongs to the Comanche, Apache, and Coahuiltecan peoples of this area. I'm very glad to join you today.
Dr. Kelly Lynch.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly Lynch. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice. I don't know if you want us to mention a leadership role at this point, but in our introductions, so most of my leadership I'm a researcher and a faculty member, so most of my research or leadership has been involved as a principal investigator on research projects, mentoring students, mentoring research assistants, and leadership involved in professional organizations, national organizations in my subject area. But as I'm moving, I thankfully recently found out my tenure case is successful. So as I'm moving towards now a senior faculty member, then I'm hoping to be more involved in leadership within the university. But I am currently, this year I'm co-chairing a committee on ongoing assessment for sexual misconduct at UTSA. So, and I am excited to continue to take on more leadership roles like that at UTSA here.
Dr. Mary McNaughton Castle.
Hi, I'm Mary McNaughton Castle. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor here at the psychology department at UTSA. I'll say right up front, don't hyphenate your name. It will make your life complicated. The students call me Dr. MC, and I am fine with that. I've had all kinds of leadership roles at UTSA. My husband and I got here in 1994, so the campus has doubled in size. I have been an associate dean. I was the leader of the Teaching and Learning Center for a while, but I'm back in my department now, which is sort of my happy place. I am working on projects for teaching excellence. I belong to the Academy of Distinguished Teachers for the UT system. And I'm also doing a lot of well-being and mental health work on campus. So I'm part of the BIT, I'm co-chairing some committees on the topic. And actually, I know a fair number of you from working in those contexts. So thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel.
Associate Dean of Students, Ann Jimenez.
Hello, thank you as well for inviting me to be part of the panel. Associate Dean of Students and Director of Student Conduct and Community Standards is my title. And I have been working approximately 25 years at UTSA, starting out as a coordinator of student conduct. And I was in juvenile probation for almost 10 years in both Bexar and Brazos County. That is what I went to school and earned my degree to become, and absolutely loved it. And I am proud to be a Roadrunner, having earned my master's in adult and higher education. I'm a co-chair of the behavioral intervention team here at UTSA, and have had a variety of leadership roles throughout the years. Very proud to have been part of the staff council, or the precursor to establishment of the staff council. Served on a SAC subcommittee self-study way back and early in my career, and then a variety of different participation on some of the search committees, etc. So thank you very much.
Dr. Kimberly Fonzo. She join us or not? Dean Robinson, LT Robinson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today, and it is a great time to have it. So I'm honored to be part of this panel and honored to be part of this group today. Again, my name is LT Robinson. Actually, Latanya Robinson is my born name. I'm originally from Houston, Texas, and I am a practitioner by trade, a generalist also by nature. And my passion is in higher education. Since I was a first-generation college student, it is important to me that we continue providing support for marginalized and students who do not have as many advantages or opportunities. We want to break down those barriers for them. I'm glad that we're having the conversation with this context today because I think it is helpful for us to continue to explore it. I'm rounding out in July of having 4 years here at UTSA, but I've been in the field of student affairs for almost 20 years. I'm a doctoral student as well, a first-generation college student, and I'm looking forward to sharing some insight based on some of the experiences that I've had because they have been varied. So I'm looking forward to engaging in this conversation with you all today.
Thank you for joining us, panelists. I think we're ready to get started. So when we think about discrimination in the workplace, we may think about several types of discrimination, such as age, disability, national origin, religious discrimination. And in addition to this, women may also experience pregnancy discrimination and sexual harassment. So I'm going to call upon our students now to introduce their questions. Anjali, will you introduce yourself and start with our first topic of discrimination in the workplace?
Hi, my name is Anjali Shaw. I am the Student Government Chief of Staff. I'm a junior, senior, kind of in that weird area, trying to graduate early. My major is kinesiology and I'm on the pre-med path. So kind of like how Dr. Hernandez said that we are going to start off talking about discrimination in the workplace. So my question to you guys is, it's no secret that often women get discriminated against based on their clothes, their hair, their race, and especially women of color, unfortunately. How do you suggest that we overcome this? Do we boycott certain companies? And how do we ask for change?
Dr. Sinanandi, would you like to start with a response to that question?
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a really great question. I wish I had the answer, but I'll offer some thoughts. I should have said that my specialism is transatlantic slavery, the history of Caribbean and British triangular transatlantic slavery. And so I come to issues of equity and gender really via that historical lens that looks right back to how Black enslaved women were treated on plantations, and how many of the people who owned and sold them were not just white men, but also white women. I mean, this is what the historiography is showing us right now. So to come directly to your question, as a Marxist abolitionist, my perspective is that we must look at everything as systemically interlinked, so that we must work as a community. We can't put the burden of fighting against discrimination upon any one of us. And it's really, I follow my, Angela Davis was here last week. I hope many of you saw her. I'm inspired by her. I'm inspired by the Black queer women of the Combahee River Collective, who offer us models of action that are community-based, and that ask us all to recognize the different ways in which we're both gendered and raced, and in terms of how that intersects with ability, motherhood. I'm a mother of 2 children. I'm a long-term breastfeeding mother. And I think that has to be part of this conversation, because I also emigrated. I'm also an immigrant. I was very lucky in the UK. We have legally mandated 1 year of maternity leave, which I know sounds like a luxury in the United States. 6 months of that is paid. I simply would not be in academia if that had not been my experience. So, you know, solidarity out to everybody. So I think how do we overcome these? We first recognize that these structures that we're entering into are white patriarchal capitalist structures, and we name that explicitly, and we understand how we're being constituted within our various roles, often to work antagonistically against each other. Academia in particular and corporations are competitive, and they reward people who adopt and assimilate into the individualistic model. So my first advice to anybody entering into a white neoliberal institution, such as the one we're sitting in right now in UTSA, is to build community, build transracial, cross-class community, and to listen to each other, and to always put forward demands as a community, and to respect each other's differences within that. And I think the Combahee Collective offers a really good model. So I think read these would be my first advice for practical action.
I love all those books you mentioned. And I think it's important, kind of like how you said, you should acknowledge it and call it what it is. So I think that's a great way to inform everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sinanan. Delaney, would you like to introduce yourself and post your question?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Delaney Pierce. I am the SGA SHAC director. I'm a senior majoring in public health. And my question for you today is, unfortunately, sexual harassment is an issue for many women in the workplace. So with things like the Me Too movement, do you notice any positive changes in society?
Dr. Lynch, would you like to start us off on that one?
Sure. So I didn't mention, so my primary area of research is interpersonal victimization, specifically family violence, intimate partner violence, and sexual victimization. So this is something I'm in tune to, both on a research side, and then of course as a female, I am interested in this. I do think there's been changes. I think mainly people are talking about these issues more openly. I think there's more of a focus, national kind of spotlight on these issues in terms of doing events at universities and, having kind of movements at a national and local level. So I do think there's been some change. I certainly don't think it's at the level it needs to be. I think that there's still, people just don't believe people who come forward with their experiences as survivors or people experiencing workplace sexual harassment. People just don't like to believe. I think there's often times people are often met with scrutiny, or even if they are believed and a complaint is processed, I still think people are met with other negative consequences and implicit and fears of being disagreeable. So I think there's a long way to go. And then, of course, I think, and kind of thinking about discrimination, intersectionality of this, still a lot of people, myself included, a lot of people studying this and looking at these issues, it's still kind of, we talk about white feminism, it's still there's not a lot of diversity within the people looking at these issues and studying these issues, because, of course, women and experience things differently, but also it goes much further than that. And women of color, people of color, people that aren't, straight, or perfectly heterosexual, there's a lot in terms of the diversity of people and the way we're approaching these issues is still, I think, also there's a lot further to go on that. And I think bringing more voices to the table is certainly, from different perspectives, is at the very least our starting place of what we need to go. And we need more diverse people studying these issues and being involved and having a seat at the table in terms of policy. So I think we've gone far, but there's, I think, certainly much further to go. And I hope we don't stop and say, okay, we settled the Me Too movement, we're done, we'll move on to the next hot button issue. So I hope we keep moving forward on it.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch.
So along that same vein, then how could we continue the conversation to make sure that workplaces are held accountable?
Any of our panelists can chime in on that.
I'd like to chime in on that a bit. I definitely agree with Dr. Lynch that there is some progress, but there is much more to do. And I would like to have us consider not just workplace accountability, but also ownership. And I think that's one of the more challenging pieces that has been happening so far. But it is time for us to move past just stating that it is an issue and that we're looking to make changes. We need for individuals to own it, to own the process along with us. And it is not the responsibility of one office, compliance or training or any of those other areas. Our entire institution, or any institution who is managing this, needs to be part of the process and ingrain the values of being a human and respecting others as humans, as fellow humans, to do the same. So until we are able to make those steps towards progress in that way, we'll just continue to tread water in this. So that's going to be a step that's needed in addition to the accountability piece.
I would like to
a little bit further on that as well. With the accountability piece, it's putting it into action, becoming involved in the organizations or groups that can advocate for that change, including staff council. We have many members of student government represented today, faculty senate, but any advocacy from within and coming not just with the complaint, but with the problem solving ideas. I think that always moves anything further along if you are putting out those ideas as we go along.
Thank you.
I'd like to add, if I could, that this is both a personal and a professional issue for me. And I've told a number of people that I left my first graduate program in 1983, filing charges of sexual harassment against my advisor at a time when there was no office, there was no policy. The University of California, Santa Barbara, to their credit, came up with the one female dean on campus and sent me to talk to her. In the end, I left the program and started a different graduate program the same year that I would have finished the first time. So that had a pretty negative effect on me personally. But what I notice going forward is we have made a lot of progress, and it's hard when you're younger to see this. I talk to my daughters about it all the time. But at that era, there was no talk about harassment or assault in the workplace. There was no structure for it. I was really fortunate. The male department chair of where I was recognized and supported me, and that made a big difference. But the change that I see that's positive is younger people won't put up with it as much. We have increased your willingness to recognize and call it out, which was a tremendous problem. When I finally left, it turned out I was probably the third graduate student this person had done this to. And there were probably people after me because he didn't lose his job. But the point is, we're not putting up with it. But all of that said, we've got to be nuanced and compassionate too, because this is a hard time for men in workplaces and academia as well. My husband is a professor at UTSA and has tried extremely hard to be supportive of women and open of women's issues, but he worries about even asking people questions because that might be misconstrued. And the problem I see as a clinical psychologist is that human interactions are really messy. And I think we've got to pay a lot of attention to intent. If someone says something that's harassing that you don't like, and you call them out on it and they stop, to me, that is a whole different thing than those people who have been warned and keep going or don't stop. And I think we can't afford to just create this sort of dichotomy of there's the people who get it and those who don't. We've got to do a lot of education across the board to make this actually be a solvable problem.
Thank you all for responding to that. We could do so much on just this topic alone, but I'm going to move us along to our next topic that I think is equally important on the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap is something that is widely discussed in today's working world, and statistics according to payscale.com show that women earn 76 cents on the dollar compared to men. And so Anjali has a great question in this area, and I'm going to ask her to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Sorry if you hear the background noise. Laundry is being done. But women around the world face a gender pay gap in the workplace. Although it is 2021, we have yet to see meaningful change. Have you experienced this before? And if so, how do you suggest women address our employers when asking for the same salary as their male counterparts?
And this is open for any of our panelists to.
I'm happy to start off. Oh, sorry. Did you want to? Okay, I'm happy to start off because I am, again, I think what I would emphasize going into the question is it shouldn't be up to any individual woman to have an argument with her boss, however compassionately we might feel towards our male co-workers. The bottom line is that we are in a systemic situation of patriarchy, and we're all positioned to behave in certain ways. And so again, what I would emphasize is to understand that this is systemically organized. It's not an accident that women receive less pay. It is deliberately designed in that way. So going in with our eyes open to understand that these gendered paid gaps are deliberate. They're not accidental. And that's historic. And just to put it in context, the unpaid domestic labor that women contribute to the economy, if it was paid, it would be worth $28 trillion a year. Okay, $28 trillion. Women undertake 4.5 hours of unpaid domestic labor every day. And that is to support our heteronormative, white, patriarchal, capitalist society. So we're already not being paid overwhelmingly. Men do two hours per day of unpaid labor in comparison, but they get a lot of the benefits of how society is set up. So we're already not being paid overwhelmingly. And at the current moment in COVID, we're losing a huge infrastructure of childcare that was overwhelmingly undertaken by women of color and young mothers of children. And so we are living in a society that comes out of settler colonialism, specifically in the United States, that absolutely does not value small children or women and mothers. I mean, we have to just say that very clearly. And if we're lucky enough and privileged enough to find ourselves in these positions, we must start to advocate for ourselves as a community. So yeah, I just want to emphasize that it's thinking systemically and making sure that while we demand equity, we're not demanding the same as, we're demanding what we need for ourselves to give equity. So as a breastfeeding mother, as the only woman of color, when I was in the United Kingdom, I was a senior lecturer, that's associate professor level. I've had to come down the academic ladder to restart my career because of gendered based harassment in my workplace. So we must understand how, yeah, it's a systemic situation. And I would hope that nobody ever has to feel that they have to argue for these things as an individual.
Thank you.
And I would add that within each organization, there are also some systemic expectations that might be unique to that environment. When I went into one of my probation roles, there was an attitude that everybody has to do time before they should get a promotion or before they should even apply for a promotion. And I did not know that that existed at that time. And as soon as I was beyond my months of probation going into a job, I applied for the position that I was well qualified for and had a male colleague confront me in front of quite a few people in a public area. And that was extremely uncomfortable for me. That's not a comfortable position ever for me. I don't like public displays, but I remained very focused and very kind. He questioned why I should feel that I had just gotten there to that job and already felt like I should apply and move up, etc. That why wasn't I waiting my turn? And I very politely but directly stated that I hear you. I'm very qualified for this. I bring quite a bit of experience from my prior position, and I'm eligible, and that if anyone within the department wasn't applying, they were doing themselves a disservice. And he made a comment kind of under his breath about being the major breadwinner in his family. And I looked at him and I physically turned toward him and said, and I am a major breadwinner in my family. And he did not know how to handle that. He just was flabbergasted. And he eventually, within the next 6 months or a year, became a good friend of mine because it opened a dialogue. And he was willing to hear and listen. And while uncomfortable for me that it was a public setting in front of like juveniles and their families while we were waiting for detention hearings, word got around. And I don't know that things changed all that much because I was just there. That was in the end of my first year, going into my second, and I was just there for 4 years, but 4.5. And the internal attitude, I did see some change, but I didn't see big change. But I know that I was never approached like that again for any position that I applied for.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. Diana, I wonder if you'd like to introduce yourself and present your question.
Yes, hi, good morning. My name is Diana Herrera. I am a sophomore in biomedical engineering, and I'm representing the Society of Women Engineers today. My question is, what do you believe is the cause of the gender pay gap?
Dr. Synanon, would you think you'd like to chime in there?
Well, at the risk of sounding repetitive, it is white patriarchal capitalism that is the cause of it. And you know, if we're thinking of, well, how do we fight against these enormous structures? It is naming, recognizing, and understanding. You know, as an immigrant, I used to live in Ireland. I grew up in Trinidad. I'm part Trinidadian, so I've grown up mostly in a Caribbean island that was colonized. I moved to Northern Ireland. That was a colonial territory still occupied by the British in a very violent way when I was a teenager there. I've lived in England and I've come here. So I've understood the different ways in which white settler colonialism manifests itself in different societies. So that's my hyper awareness of how we are historically, specifically raced and gendered. And I think it's really important to bring that outside foreigners perspective into this conversation, because one of the things that Angela Davis tells us is that everything we learn about is constituted as normal. So feminist abolitionist theories try to defamiliarize what we think of as normal. So even something like pay and rewards within capitalism, I would start to question all of that. And that's why I turned it around to who isn't being paid. And so, you know, if I'm talking to this group now, it's to say, don't argue for, I want the same as you. We need something very different for all of us. At the moment, capitalism is collapsing. We've just lived through a storm, and the suffering because of the lack of water and power was the direct result of economic ideology that tries to get maximum profit for corporations. We've just lived through a very tangible lesson of what's at risk. And that is what we need to advocate for. We need to advocate for a system that distributes wealth in a much fairer way.
Thank you so much for that very insightful response. Nadia, would you please introduce yourself and present your question?
Hi, my name is Nadia Higgins, and I am the president of Women in STEM, the student organization at UTSA. My question concerning this topic is, how would you recommend that someone negotiate their salary if they are interested in doing so for a new job?
Dr. McNaughton-Castle, would you like to start us on that one?
As always, I have to struggle to find my mute button, but sure. This is a difficult question, and I think I would follow both what Dr. Synanon and Dr. Jimenez have said, which is that these are tough questions. There are systemic reasons that make it difficult, and then there are specific issues in your place of work. I really do think that women can band together on some of these things, and in a workplace setting in particular, support each other and make statements, complaints, comments to the greater department. I read an article that I loved about women in Washington who have developed this procedure they call amplifying, where if they're at a meeting and a male overspeaks, talks over them, ignores them, doesn't call on them, they each amplify each other's position. And we've been trying that in the psych department to great success. So if I say something and then 10 minutes later, someone says my comment as though it's theirs, we have an agreement that the rest of us will say, yeah, that's what she said earlier. Or, you know what, you're right, I want to support that. And I think we do have to work together, because as much as it's a systemic problem, which it is, as an individual, when you are arguing about workplace security or as Anne said, promotions, it also influences your actual life. You may not be able to make the stand you want to make and say, well, give me the raise or I quit, even though that's how you feel. And I think we have to be sympathetic to that as well.
I just want to add to, I think, and it's not so much advice for asking for a raise, but I think kind of what everyone's been, to add on to what everyone's been saying, which I completely agree with. I think women just, when it comes to men in terms of negotiating, I think there's this I don't know if it's like implicit or maybe it's an explicit belief that like women don't like money as much as men, or don't want to make as much. And I when you mentioned Dr. Gimenez, the talk about the breadwinner, oh my gosh, how many, and I feel like I work around a lot of people that are pretty good in terms of thinking about men and women as professionals, but there's still these even like implicit things of, well, they have a family to support, as you know, as if we don't too, or even if you're, you know, I have a husband who works as well, but it doesn't mean I don't want to get paid less than my male counterpart, or I don't want to do the same job and make less money, or asking for a raise. It's almost viewed as normal for a man to, you know, kind of aggressively pursue a raise. But for a woman, it's like, whoa, all you care about is money, or you're being a bit aggressive. And it's just, I think there's just these, it's just, you know, things I've noticed over time, and I'm sure everyone's experienced it, where it's almost like men and women view money differently, or that it's less important to them. And then, so and people are almost more surprised if all of a sudden a woman is asking for a raise, or is expecting to be paid similar to her male counterpart, and like as if they don't have a family to support, which is not true. And even if they were not the sole breadwinner, that doesn't mean they should make less money or care to make less money. So I think there's even just these, I don't know if it's like just implicit kind of things that you know, people have about what the way women, and I feel like women are like kind of pushed to feel like uncomfortable talking about money, or less comfortable than men talking about money and talking about salary and talking about these things, as if it's like a dirty secret for women, but for men it's like the norm. So I think it's just even things like that of, you know, feeling confident and comfortable. And you know, I love the idea that Dr. McNaughton Castle said about women supporting each other and saying, yeah, like that's what she said, but like coming together. And you know, we've done that where we've shared salary and shared, you know, things like that of like, you know, how do we solve this problem together as a group and support one another? Because otherwise, yeah, I think there's just this belief that money is this dirty thing that women shouldn't bother themselves with.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. We're going to move to our third round of questions on the work-life balance. Working women of today sometimes experience this ongoing challenge of juggling so many responsibilities, such as their employment, their education, and parenting or family responsibilities. We may also experience a gender bias when asked personal questions about children and family during interviews or when working on projects. Especially if we are taking jobs primarily held by our male counterparts. And we want to hear from our panelists about any advice they've done to manage some of these responsibilities and priorities. So I think Delaney's going to start us with our question on this topic.
Yes. So obtaining a perfect balance between work and home life can seem to be an unattainable myth. So how do you balance work and personal life? And do you have any tips or advice for women struggling to find that balance?
So I have a moment in time for myself that I never thought would come, but I knew what kind of mom I wanted to be, and I knew what kind of worker I wanted to be. And I went into the profession of juvenile probation, absolutely loved it, and never thought I would do anything else. That was my commitment and my calling. And I reached a point where, because of some politics in one of the cities that I was working in, we as juvenile probation officers were being called upon to remain late for delayed court, for just a variety of reasons that were happening, and that truly I didn't fully understand until about 6 months to a year later. But for me, I had to reach a point where I wanted to be there for my own children. And that was very important to me. So you have to know what your values are and what you need. And for me, in that situation, I made the choice to seek out a new profession. And it was a little bit like going back home, because I had been in higher ed as an RA in my undergraduate degree at Sam Houston State University. And there was this coordinator for student judicial affairs, which is now currently student conduct. But I really wasn't sure what I would do with the skills that I had. And I would just say that for me, I knew I needed to be somewhere that had more flexibility in the schedule. And so for me, I needed to make that kind of a change. It was very positive for me. It was very empowering. And to say that I've still been here 25 years later, I enjoyed it. I just changed caseloads in a way, but my heart never left my juveniles. I try to find ways to still support that arena. But I also have found working with college students very, very rewarding. And I didn't realize that I would love that like I did juvenile probation. So I would say you have to also be open to that. I did not feel like I was driven out.
I have a really similar story. When we first got to San Antonio, my husband had the job at UTSA. I was teaching adjunct at night and I was doing some clinical work. And I can still picture the scene as I sat in traffic on Bandera, waiting to turn left on Gilbo. On the phone was a psychiatrist because one of my clients was suicidal. And I was late to get home because the daycare person had to leave. And I remember thinking, I can't make this call. You know, my kids are 3 years old and the babysitter has to leave and this person is suicidal. And I stopped doing clinical work for a while because I just couldn't balance that world. It worked out because once my kids got older and were more independent, I could do that. But I'd like to ask some of the younger folks here who have been parents on campus and working, you know, when I was getting tenure, I can safely say that I did not one single time say, I can't do that because I have kids. Meetings, conferences, paperwork, I always said, yeah, I'll do it, and then made it happen myself. So I am kind of bemused and kind of annoyed when my faculty colleague males now just blithely say, well, I have to watch the kids that afternoon, you'll have to change the meeting, or expect to get sort of all these kudos for quote unquote babysitting their own kids. So I would be curious to hear what some of the younger people here think.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm in the throes of it. I have a toddler and another on the way, so I feel like I'm in that survival stage of how do I, you know, for my son's first year of life, oh, he's sick all the time. I was like, this is going to be the stomach bug that ends my career. Like, am I going to be able to do it? I agree. I will say that I think being a working mother in any feel like it's hard, but I do feel like academia, the flexibility allows for so much. I do feel like it's great on that end, or at least, you know, the flexibility as a faculty member. So, because I truly don't know how what I would have done in my first, because my husband doesn't have a flexible job. So it's hard, like he's a physician at a hospital, so it's hard for him to leave. So I don't know how I would have gotten through, especially that first year, if I didn't have the job I do. But yeah, I think I'm lucky to be in a department of young people with young families, and there's the general culture of my department, the norm is that people have young kids, and that's just things are going to pop up, and we generally do make it work in terms of meetings, things like that. People still are able to do what they need to do, but we also it's pretty, I don't know, I think it's pretty the norm to understand if things pop up with people's kids, people have to leave, then that's, you know, accepted. But I do say that with, like, I understand that's not the norm in many places. So I feel lucky that that in my department it's pretty normal, and to have, for most people to have young kids and to understand that, because but I was able to, I mean, I think the flexibility allowed me to be able to, I mean, sometimes I prayed like I could just get through class and have to rush home because like the daycare is like, oh, he's sick again, or I have to get to the doctor. I just remember thinking like, I just need to to lecture, and there was times I had, a couple times I had to cancel things, but in general, I feel like the flexibility allowed me to survive, and hopefully it'll allow me to survive the next. I have to laugh at your comment about men calling babysitting their children. It's like, it's not babysitting, they're your kids. My husband wouldn't dare say that because I'd beat him, but it's just funny when I hear people say that too. I'm like, that's not babysitting. I've had male colleagues call it babysitting, and I'm like, that's your child, that's taking care of your children. So, but
I did want to chime in really quickly on a different perspective. I have chosen not to participate in parenthood or in marriage. So I did want to let folks know that there are other options that are out there as well. But I do want to also address the idea and the considerations about work-life balance. And I don't believe that there's such a thing. No one will ever be able to prescribe for you what balance looks like. And so it is very important to define for yourself healthy and healthy boundaries from your perspective, stating what your needs are in order for you to be able to be a great professional. If you are committing to being a great professional, you and those who work with you should be able to be respectful of those boundaries. And so if there are times when you're feeling that it's just not possible, you can assertively state to them, this is not possible for me, but I can refer you to someone else who can help you with this. And I'll help you along the way and provide these resources for you so that you can get what you need, but I'm unable to do that. So being able to establish those boundaries and hold others accountable to what you all have agreed upon. And maybe there might be times when you might have to change those too. But being able to state that clearly and upfront will definitely go a long way.
I'd like to just support that. And I've talked to a number of faculty and staff who are single and or don't have kids and struggle because sometimes there's an expectation, well, you don't have kids, so you can do the vacation or the overtime or whatever that is. And that also is not a fair way to approach some of these issues, because oftentimes the demands, as LT says, the demands of the organization are difficult for everybody.
Yes, thank you, panelists, for that diverse perspective on that idea of balance. I'm going to move us into our last round of questions. And round 4 is about advancing in your profession and the ideas of mentorship and sponsorship. When women think about advancing in their careers, they think about promotions to management or to maybe senior or executive levels, or in the case of faculty, to tenured positions or maybe administrative positions. So I'm going to ask Abby. She hasn't had a chance to ask questions yet, but I'm going to ask her to introduce herself and present her question.
Hi, I'm Abby Bally. I'm a junior on the women's track and field and cross country team, and I'm also a member of the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. I guess a question I have, in athletics, I play an important role in mentoring the incoming freshman athletes, and this sets the student up for success and by helping them adjust to college life and just kind of be like their support with them, knowing that they're not alone coming into this, because it's like a whole new environment. So I guess my question for you guys are, what have you done to strive for those leadership roles and opportunities? And have you ever mentored or sponsored others to strive for specific roles and leadership opportunities?
Dr. McNaughton-Castle, do you want to start us on that one?
I do. I advise student groups. I write literally 60 or 70 letters of recommendation a year. I'm always encouraging students to push for something more. But I'll tell you what I think is the greatest problem that holds women back, and that is that they don't understand what the imposter syndrome is. If you're going to be a female in the workplace or academics, go read about it. It's the belief that somehow you are secretly not really good enough, smart enough, trained enough, eligible to be in a position. Turns out that everybody experiences the imposter syndrome on occasion, but unless you can recognize it and really fight it, I find that it's the reason women will say, well, I'm not going to really push. They didn't ask me. Maybe someone else knows something. And I think we are socialized to do that and men are not. And there have been studies that show that in interviews and other situations, women will lowball their own abilities, whereas men overstate them. And that's a problem if you're trying to move up in an organization. So yeah, if you haven't heard about the imposter syndrome, there's tons of writing about it, and it's worth looking at and thinking about how you can combat that in your own life.
I'd like to speak on imposter syndrome specifically. I'm a person who has struggled with imposter syndrome for quite some time. And as an undergraduate student, being a first generation student with parents who never got past the 5th grade, I often felt out of place and confused and unguided in my experiences. And I found myself undercutting the level of experience or confidence or competence that I've had in roles. And I can hear myself in my previous points in life stating, oh, I got here by accident, or I really didn't deserve that. Those are parts of imposter syndrome. And I participated in a session last semester where someone really reframed the idea of imposter syndrome to call it imposter experiences. And so now you have the ability to move past those things because it isn't a constant issue. You can identify it, you can call it for what it is, and then you can work through ways to move past it. I personally mentor continually because it is my way to give back. It is part of the way that I provide service to the universe. And I met with a student just yesterday in a mentorship conversation and stated something that Dr. McNaughton-Castle just mentioned about how men feel very comfortable and confident even when they have no experience to apply for a job because maybe there's a shot. When women hold themselves back on those opportunities because they think that, oh, well, maybe I don't have the experience to do it anyway. I highly encourage and recommend shooting your shot and going for it anyway. What the worst you will get is no, but the other piece that you'll get from it or that you'll gain from it is that experience of applying and trying. And you can follow up with those folks and say, well, tell me some more about why I wasn't chosen. And that gives you that additional experience to work up to help you along the way.
Thank you for that valuable advice, Dean Robinson. I'm going to let Nadia introduce herself and present our last question for today.
Hello again. Okay, so my question on this topic is many times women seem to encounter a glass ceiling when trying to advance in their profession. How have you or any people that you know broken barriers in your profession?
All right, would any of our panelists like to take a shot at that one?
I don't know if I'll speak to certainly not breaking barriers. I feel like I'm very early in my career, but I have experienced a male supposedly acting in an advisory role and telling me not to go up for something or apply for something because he didn't want, he explicitly said that I didn't want to appear like a hot shot. Or I would be, what happens if you don't get it? You might be, you might be upset. And told a male colleague, never once said, you might seem like a hot shot, like, oh, go for it. So, and it was like the exact same kind of thing. And so even though I tried not to internalize that, it's hard not to. Thankfully, I have mentors and people I could discuss through that I was able to shake it off when I did it anyway and actually was successful. So, but just the whole thing of like, I'm telling someone that like the female that you would appear like a hot shot, but the male wouldn't. It's just things like that where I think that's, the glass ceiling. I mean, if I had internalized that and listened to that, I actually would have missed out on a really good opportunity. So I think, thankfully, I had other people around me to help build me up and give me advice and give me the confidence to be able to go for what I was going for. So I think it's just even things like that. And again, that was supposed to be advice. And I think that, you know, that's what you're going to experience as a female. And I think then that's why people, you know, going back to imposter experiences, I like that, LT, but just that self-doubt of like, oh, well, maybe I'm not good enough to do that, or even just second guessing yourself. So that was a relatively recent experience that I kind of.
Yeah, I'll just speak quickly if I may. That I just, you know, again, the whole question, the whole idea of breaking the glass ceiling, again, it comes from that culture of individualism, doesn't it, and of individual achievement. And so while we all want to fulfill ourselves on our career paths, if at all possible, I think it's just really important to recognize again that we risk repeating structures that are just never going to be equitable, and we're never designed to be equitable. So I just want, you know, for those of you younger than us, starting off, just to go in with that awareness, which as others have said, you know, we've got powers to name things right now. I've mentored students into MA programs, PhD programs, certainly a lot of my Latinx students. I've had to really almost force them to apply for things. I think cultures of expectations are things for all of us to be aware of, and of different cultures of expectations, and of learning how to mentor people, as everybody said, to see their own value. We're not in institutions that were designed for us. So we've already broken glass ceilings by being here. And that discourse that particularly the US education system puts on children from a very young age with systemized testing, in turn, you know, it's impossible not to internalize the idea of individual achievement, pulling oneself up from the bootstraps. But statistically, these things are nonsense. Just to give one statistic, Black women are carrying the overwhelming portion of student debt loan. Okay, student loan debt, overwhelmingly. If the current administration would fulfill its promise to the Black women of Georgia who brought them in, and cancel that student loan debt as they promised they would, it would immediately economically empower many women, but particularly Black women, to overcome the structures around them that are designed for them not to succeed. So I think in any mentoring role, I would absolutely emphasize placing the emphasis on asking individuals to see that it's not them, it's the system, and then to find ways for them to find their voice through that. The Mexican Center runs the Mellon grants for training students to enter postgraduate work, and I've tried my best to put students in there. So yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sinanon. I think, I don't know if some of you others, but I haven't met you before today, and I'm in awe of you, and I think I could sit and just listen to you all day. So with that in particular, like, I think you also mentioned earlier, like we can build community, we can make change as a community. So I encourage everyone on this call today, and those who are watching later, to reach out to people that you see on this call, make connections, let's build community. Let's work together for change and systemic change. So I want to thank all of our panelists today. I want to especially thank our students for being present and engaging with this conversation and the dialogue. In the chat, you will have seen as well, there are other events that are happening this month, and we encourage you to participate if you are able to. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and have the best Thursday ever.
Make sure to check out other Women's History Month's events going on all month long. We've got the link in the chat to some great events planned. Thank you, everyone.